Back in December, I put out a video titled Social Media Backlash, in which I talked about the growing backlash against social media companies for a variety of different reasons. The proliferation of fake news on platforms like Facebook, the monetization of questionable content on YouTube, the ability of foreign governments to use a platform like Facebook to interfere in elections, opportunistic politicians looking to score points with the public, and last but not least, the effects social media is having on young people. And in an age of moral panics, that last point in particular, the effect social media is having on young people, is especially ripe for kicking off another kind of moral panic. In that video, I cited a report from the Royal Society of Public Health in which they claim that rates of anxiety and depression have increased 70% in the last 25 years. The implication, of course, is that social media is playing some type of role. However, this article in the Houston Chronicle from June last year that asks, should we panic about teens' social media use, notes that the Royal Society's claims of a 70% increase in anxiety and depression rates dates back to 2004, before social media really took off. Here's the footnote in the actual report, but it's actually worse than the Chronicle article suggests. 2004 is the publication date of that report, and when you go to that report, the 70% data point comes from a study that was conducted before 2004. Here is the one and only mention of the 70% figure and its surrounding context. Among teenagers, rates of depression and anxiety have increased by 70% in the past 25 years, particularly since the mid-1980s. The changes are not the result of an increasing tendency to rate teenagers as problematic, but the result of real changes in behavior and experiences. So depression of teenagers has picked up particularly since the mid-1980s. Well, the blame for that can hardly be laid at the feet of social media, which certainly didn't exist immediately after the mid-1980s, nor is it even related to the current generation of teenagers. In fact, in the mid to late 1980s, I was a teenager, which means they're talking about a whole other generation, Generation X. But wait, there's more. Following that footnote, you get to the source of the 70% claim from this article, Time Trends in Adolescent Mental Health. Looking at the methodology, we learned that the current study assessed the extent to which conduct, hyperactive, and emotional problems have become more common over a 25-year period in 3 general population samples of UK adolescents. The samples used in this study were the adolescent sweeps of the National Child Development Study and the 1970 Birth Cohort Study and the 1999 British Child and Adolescent Mental Health Survey. Comparable questionnaires were completed by parents of 15 to 16-year-olds at each point, 1974, 1986 and 1999. So 1999 was the latest data point, a year in which there was no social media of note, no smartphones or tablets, and which I estimate about 1/3 to 40% of 15 to 16-year-olds didn't even use the internet. And of course, if you were 15 years of age in 1999, you're turning 34 this year, and that hardly makes you a teenager. So just to recap, the Royal Society of Health puts out a report on social media and young people's mental health and well-being, in which one of their key points is that rates of anxiety and depression in young people have risen 70% in the past 25 years, not so subtly linking to other key points such as 91% of 16 to 24-year-olds use the internet for social networking. Social media use is linked with increased rates of anxiety, depression, and poor sleep, and cyberbullying is a growing problem, with 7 in 10 young people saying they have experienced it, even though that 70% figure is derived from a study whose most recent data point relates to 1999. Yeah, I'd say that's more than a little misleading. The Chronicle article goes on to state, and evidence from other sources does not support this claim. On most behavioural indices such as violence, drug use or pregnancy, teens are actually at historic lows, indicating that teens seem to be doing rather well. Furthermore, to bolster their claims, the Royal Society of Health cite a discredited 2011 report from the American Academy of Pediatrics on Facebook depression. The report was slammed at the time for its shoddy scholarship. One author of the studies the AAP used disavowed their claims, noting the AAP cited news reports of her studies which were incorrect and were not her original studies, something that would earn an undergraduate student low marks on a report. That the Facebook depression report wasn't retracted is frankly scandalous. Even the RSPH's own survey provides little compelling evidence for alarmism. The survey is rather crude, and the study's hypotheses would have been obvious to the teens, which could have influenced their responses. The weighted effects for each form of social media suggest that in the aggregate, social media effects were minimal. Nevertheless, such a crudely done study provides little useful scientific data. As with most areas of media effects, current research indicates three things. Internet use effects tend to be small, vary quite a bit from one user to the next, and include both benefits as well as a few risks. And the biggest risks involve privacy rather than mental health. In fact, research suggests that internet use also has considerable benefits for youth. For example, one study with low-income youth found that those who use the internet more had higher academic performance on standardized tests. Other research has indicated that the internet can be a productive way to provide good quality health prevention information to youth, and the internet can be effective in providing socialization opportunities for socially isolated youth. Now, the author of that article, Chris Ferguson, put out another piece yesterday titled, "Hold On, Does Social Media Use Really Affect Kids?" Anyone doubting that the US was entering a full-blown panic over social media and smartphones hasn't been paying attention to the news recently. On January 30, the advocacy group Campaign for a Commercial-Free Childhood wrote a letter to Facebook requesting they drop plans to create a messenger service for kids only. CCFC claims that social media causes youth depression and writes that it is very likely this new app will undermine children's healthy development. On February 4, the advocacy group Common Sense Media promoted their partnership with some former tech executives to launch an anti-tech addiction lobbying effort and an ad campaign, even though tech addiction has no diagnostic meaning. These parallel efforts are almost certainly going to inflame ongoing fears about technology, but do data back their assertions? Let's consider the claims of CCFC first, that social media use is linked to depression. CCFC cites one recent study by Dr. Jean Twenge correlating smartphone use with depression in youth. But this appears to be a misrepresentation of the data. This correlation is of trivial size and unlikely to be noticeable in the general public. Dr. Andrew Przybylski, maybe, I don't know, accessed the same data set used by Dr. Twenge and said, based on that same data set, eating potatoes has the exact same negative effect on depression. The negative impact of listening to music is 13 times larger than the effect of social media. But we don't seem to be seeing those same headlines about the harmful effects of potatoes on today's youth. Recently, you may recall I cited a conversation between Jonathan Hite and Jordan Peterson in which Hite brought up the work of Jean Twenge.
So iGen, internet generation, this is Jean Twenge's work. You know, we used to think that the millennial generation ends in 1998 or 2000, but Jean Twenge shows, looking at 4 large data sets, that birth year 1995, kids born in 1995 and after are really different. Their values are different. They have much higher rates of anxiety and depression, especially the girls. Boys have gone up, girls have gone way up. And the reason seems to be that Facebook lowered its age. So in 2005, you had to be a college student at a certain number of colleges to get Facebook. In 2006, you could be any 11-year-old who lies and says that she's 13 and you've got a Facebook account. But then you're using it on your parents' PC. And in 2007, the iPhone comes out and it saturates the market faster than any consumer product ever has. So by 2010 or 11, a lot of adolescents have Facebook and other social platforms. And this is just devastating, especially to girls, because it's not texting. Texting is just me to you, you know, that's back and forth, that's fine. That, you know, when we were kids, you called your friends on the phone, that's fine. The problem seems to be, according to Twenge, it's especially platforms in which you put something out and then you wait and see what everyone says about it. And that especially is damaging to girls who already are at risk of eating disorders and image disorders.
Okay. So the aforementioned Dr. Andrew Przybylski was quoted at length in an article on Wired about his critique of Twenge's work. Say, for example, you're trying to understand the impact of social media on adolescents, as Jean Twenge, author of the iGen book, has. When Twenge and her colleagues analysed data from 2 nationally representative surveys of hundreds of thousands of kids, they calculated that social media exposure could explain 0.36% of the covariance for depressive symptoms in girls. But those results didn't hold for the boys in the dataset. What's more, that 0.36% means that 99.64% of the group's depressive symptoms had nothing to do with social media use. Pribylski puts it another way: I have the data set they used open in front of me, and I submit to you that based on that same data set, eating potatoes has the exact same negative effect on depression, that the negative impact of listening to music is 13 times larger than the effect of social media. In data sets as large as these, it's easy for weak correlational signals to emerge from the noise, and a correlation tells us nothing about whether new media screen time actually causes sadness or depression, which are the same problems scientists confront in nutritional research, much of which is based on similarly large observational work. If a population develops diabetes but surveys show they're eating sugar, drinking alcohol, sipping out of BPA-laden straws, and consuming calories to excess, which dietary variable is to blame? It could just as easily be none or all of the above. So is Hite unwittingly contributing to the formation of another moral panic? Admittedly, I'm still only halfway through The Righteous Mind, but I enjoy Hite's work. I think his creation of the Heterodox Academy, drawing attention to the difference between a university devoted to social justice versus a university devoted to truth, is extremely important. But has he been taken in by an exaggeration of the influence of social media on young people? I don't know. Back to the article. Time spent on social media is actually a poor predictor of mental health. In one recent study of more than 400 young adults, my colleagues Chloe Berryman, Charles Nagy and I found that neither time spent on social media nor the importance placed on it predicted mental health or suicide. At the same time, some behaviours such as vague booking, seeking attention through vaguely alarming posts, did serve as a red flag for suicidal thoughts. But this all seems to track with other research that suggests that social media is no magic bullet to mental health problems. How one uses social media is more important than whether one uses it. Ferguson concludes, as with all things financial, the general public should keep their eye on the source of this fear. Both CCFC and CSM are advocacy groups that tend to raise anxieties about media and solicit donations. This isn't to say that these organisations are necessarily acting in bad faith, but they do have a product to sell, and too often this involves fear rather than reasoned conversations about technology use. We need to have those reasoned conversations. How, as parents, do we balance the use of technology with exercise, homework, real-life socialisation, and sleep? What limits are right for our families? How do we positively involve technology in our own interaction with our kids? A moral panic has never nurtured these kinds of conversations. So in an era of moral panic, maybe we should hit the pause button before starting another crusade over the evils of social media. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you next time.